欢迎回到ITA看世界，延续刚刚两位教授所介绍的世界原住民族大学的精神还有目标。接下来我们也来听听原住民族学生对于这个 WINU 有什么样的看法以及愿景。
And we have two students here who are interested in WINU, right? So what would be your expectation, and why are you interested in WINU?
So I'm currently a law student, but that's at a Western university. So obviously I'm learning the Western laws because traditionally that is what has oppressed my people to the greatest extent. The law is what has been used to, you know, cut down our sovereignty and cut down our rights and oppress our people. So if I had the opportunity to, after gaining this degree, postgraduate study, learn in a formalised and a recognised process the traditional laws and ancestral knowledge and culture, that would almost legitimise to Western people my efforts to really find a coming together between traditional and Western modern laws to find a way forward for our people so the law can no longer be used as something to oppress our people and to take down our rights, but something to actually empower us and to build a stronger future that comes together between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
I like the term you used, coming together, because for some people they might think it's exclusive. So if you are in WINU, then you only learn this and that. But that's something we are trying to really break, right? Because for this world, they always try to divide as black and white, but we have a lot more colors than that. How about you? What do you still have some?
Well, it's important to come together. This is the world we live in. We coexist. So how can we coexist peacefully and mutually respect our differences, but ensure that everyone is able to fulfil the life that they really want to? So I think it's very important to recognise that it's coming together, that it can be a peaceful future. We're not necessarily defined.
Can I just respond to that? No, I think it's really important for people to know that WINU is not about segregation. It's not about that at all. Even though in the Western education system, our young ones, or our people generally, aren't afforded the opportunity to learn both cultural and Western way. That's not what WINU is. WINU is about saying to our younger people, if you need to get a Western education, that's fine, but you also need to know your cultural heritage as well. You need to know that there is a cultural knowledge that underpins everything that you do as your sovereign right. And so it would be wrong for anyone to think that WINU is about expecting people to make a choice, expecting people to think that there's a segregated approach being put in play. That's not it at all. It's actually offering an opportunity for our people to learn both ways, both cultural and Western ways, and we have to live in this world. But what happens is a lot of our people go through the Western higher education system and they fall by the way because they're not having that cultural heritage nurtured, and they're certainly not having it recognised in many ways. And so I'm glad you raised that, because it is critical that people understand that WINU is not about segregation. In actual fact, a lot of the Australian representatives that have been involved in WINHEC and subsequently WINU, we're all employed, we have been employed in Western universities, and we're using that knowledge now to know what needs to be done to give our people a more equitable access to higher education. And so I'm glad you raised that issue.
But what about like if as a non-Indigenous person who is also interested in the program of WINU or interested in becoming part of the system, how can they also apply, or can they also be eligible to be part of it?
I think in the first instance it's really for our people to have this opportunity to enrol and to come to an institution where they know that they belong and that they can be safe in recording and researching and recording their knowledge for their families, for their people, for their tribes, but at the same time allowing that information to be provided into, say, a WINU library for other Indigenous peoples or for others to view, but it's their record. And I think that sometime in the future, that may be an opportunity for that to be opened up. But at the moment, it is for Indigenous peoples. basically. I mean, it's not, and like Professor Brock Robinson said, it's not about segregation, but it's our right to be able to establish and develop our institute in the way that we want it to be, and not to have it eroded by others who would like to, you know, bring about their ways into it, because they've already got those institutions. You know, there's 43 public universities in Australia and private institutions, but there's only one Indigenous institute, Bachelor Institute in the Territory. And so therefore, you know, we are way behind the 8 ball, and so we need to have our own institutions so that we can actually provide that opportunity to our people who will not go into those institutions and have never been into them. But our younger people and our younger generations have the opportunity to go into the mainstream, as well as now to come into WINU and look at how they can bring that knowledge that they are learning from a mainstream and bring it to the Indigenous platform and look at it from another cultural lens.
So I think because you mentioned about Permanent Forum, because I was in Permanent Forum for several times. I remember once I was working with the Youth Caucus for some years. I remember once we were discussing about the education we want, and we raised this one idea that we should change the idea of right to education, because a lot of times we're saying that Indigenous peoples need to be educated, but actually we should maybe turn it around, saying that it's the right to learn. We decide what we want to learn and how we want to learn, where we want to learn. So it's more like proactive, not just being passively saying that we are being educated by something or someone.
Absolutely.
So Elijah, maybe you would like to also share like what's your vision and what's your expectation?
So for me, as a young man who is really interested in preserving my language and preserving Indigenous languages across Australia, WINU offers me the opportunity to connect with other people who want to preserve their language as well. And it gives me the ability to research and hopefully join in with others and be able to preserve the languages that are dying out. My own language, there are less than 30 people that can speak it fluently in the world. And that to me is sad. You know, there's people that speak 5 or 6 languages, but none of them are Indigenous. So why should my language suddenly be left to the side when others get to come up? And for me, I'm hoping that by applying to and, you know, joining in with WINU, I'm given the opportunity to go out and start to preserve language and record it and record our histories through language. Because in Australia, language was an important part of passing down our culture. And the stories, we can still listen to the stories and we still know them, but it means so much more if it's being told in the original language that it was being told in.
Yeah.
Can I add to that as well? I think also the fact that WINU offers a very unique opportunity to collaborate with Indigenous peoples from different nations, because particularly when you're looking at language revitalisation, I think Australia has a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples in countries such as Canada or in New Zealand. So I think even going there, it offers a further opportunity for you to learn from their experiences and their successes so that we can hopefully then apply that back home.
And also, as you mentioned about being safe within this environment, that's also something important for us. It's not only because in Taiwan it happened, like still, I think it's still happening that we have someone come to the community to make all this record and take all these materials from us. And then when the community wants to get all these materials, we have to ask for the permission.
Yes.
And it's just not right this way.
Yes.
And also for our people, sometimes they don't really, because now for example my elders, now if someone just come to the community and want to interview them, sometimes they just talk nonsense because they don't want to share the true stories with the outsiders anymore, because you know they just come and they don't see where all this go. So I think that's also something that we can change this kind of situation and also this bad practice.
Yes.
But you know, I think protecting the intellectual and cultural property rights of First Nations people, of Indigenous people, is absolutely sacrosanct. It has to be. And so what you've just said is critical to everything that WINU stands for, is not allowing Western research standards to be used to usurp or to deny people's rights to be treated with respect, to have their intellectual and cultural property rights respected. And so rather than take a negative approach, that's why the WINHEC research standards were developed, so that those who study under WINU have to engage in the research standards that do just what you said. They protect the rights of our people to having their knowledge usurped, and it protects the cultural heritage. It protects all those things that over years First Nations peoples have been concerned about in terms of the imposition of Western research standards.
So because of the time, but I would like to pose my final question to all of you. Like, if you vision for 10 years from now, what would you like to see with WINHEC or WINU, or maybe for yourself, if you, after you finish your degree with WINU, and what would you perceive yourself after 10 years after? Maybe you can start from Elijah.
Well, for me, in 10 years from now, what I would like to see is for WINU to be something that's normal. I don't want it to be the brand new thing. I want it to be something where Indigenous people, for them, that's a normal option to choose. It's no longer I have to choose between an Indigenous university or a Western one. It becomes, okay, WINU is one of my options that I can choose, and it's normalised to be going to WINU and learning your culture.
Thank you. Lana?
I think I would like to also ensure that it's very accessible, that people feel like it's reasonable and it's achievable for them to get there, because I think that is a huge thing that stops a lot of young people and like you say, when we fall by the way in the Western system, is that we feel like we're not capable of going that extra step. So making sure that WINU is something that's accessible for that, and we feel that we can come together. And also, and also for it to be seen as legitimate from the outside, that it's not pushed and it's just, oh, that's, you know, something small that they do there, that it is seen as a legitimate university and that it is to the same standard as other universities. It just works on ancestral knowledge.
Thank you. How about our two professors? What would you envision in 10 years?
Well, my vision in 10 years is that WINU will have private funding.
That's impressive.
And so that we can work right across the world with First Nations peoples. But most importantly, where we're within our own nations, that our communities, that we'll have WINU operating around lots of Aboriginal communities where they don't have access or they choose not to access the mainstream universities, and that our older people have that opportunity to come in and enrol in WINU, either with their grandchildren or their children, or as a group, so that they can record and they can bring to life their ancestral knowledge for the generations to come, so it's not lost.
Thank you.
You know, there are 3 other universities that are similar to WINU. I won't say where they are, but there are. And no one would ever question the legitimacy of those universities. No one would ever do that. And they use their own cultural knowledge to retain the use of jungle vines as an important part of their culture and their cultural heritage. And so one of the things that I'd like to do to see happen in 10 years' time is that we ourselves have confidence in the legitimacy of something like WINU. If we don't believe in it, then nobody else will. If we don't look at it and see this is our sovereign rights to have this institution that can be measured and prefaced upon any single standards that a Western university would put before us, and everything we did was we made sure that every single program, every single principle, every single policy could be measured in both Western standards and cultural standards, so that there would never ever be a diminishing of the integrity of what WINU represents and what WINU will do for our graduates, for our people across the world when they do become graduates. And so I'd like to think that in 10 years' time, we just use the term WINU like you would Harvard, or like you use any other, university, be it, Ivy League or, just the university down the road. And so I think there's an element of fear when people step out in difference, and if you don't believe in the foundations of why you step out in difference, it'll never ever take off. And so that just shows the volume of confidence, faith, belief that people had in this journey, not only with WinHEC, but in WinU. And so I'd like to think that in 10 years' time, we come back and we have this conversation in beautiful Taiwan. And I might say, congratulations to your people, because you were just as much part of the journey. The Taiwanese people here, Awi Mona and several other people were just as much part of the championing of the journey. And so I'd like to think in 10 years' time, we're sitting here saying that we've got 2,000, 3,000 graduates, and that would be my vision. I'd be happy then. I'd die happy.
Yeah, I think I'm not so sure if I can put it this way, if it's proper. That because for a lot of indigenous peoples in this generation, we always feel so in between. Like we're in between the modern society and also our indigenous heritage. And sometimes, just as you say, we feel like we have to make the choice. But now, with the idea of WinU, actually we're turning this in-betweenness as advantage, right? We're taking the advantages from both sides and then make ourselves stronger.
One of the greatest things of WinU, it's about helping people build both their professional scholarship and their cultural leadership. That's what it's about. It's not putting people in a position where they have to choose either or. It's saying, through this journey, you're able to enjoy the scholarship of both the Western system and the cultural system, so that when you step out in that world, you can be a robust citizen who can walk their cultural walk, who can interact in Western world, but never, ever, ever allow their cultural heritage to be usurped. And so that's the absolute fundamentals of WinU. So they won't have to worry about whether choosing to be Western, whether choosing to be cultural. We have a fundamental sovereign right to be in this world, walking in our cultural heritage, not feeling that we have to have our cultural heritage usurped because we have to work, live, interact, engage in the Western world. We should be able to enjoy, and we've got the absolute privilege of being able to enjoy the knowledge from both Western and cultural systems that many non-Indigenous people would just love to have. We should celebrate in it.
I think so, yeah. So I would like to thank you again for sharing all your knowledges and also your vision with us. And I believe within this 10 years, maybe like after 10 years, we can have a talk again.
I hope so, if I'm still alive.
I believe we will achieve more than what we expect today.
Absolutely.
We'll have the faith and we'll work
faith.
with confidence together in this journey.
Yeah, we are. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
南美洲亚马逊雨林的熊熊大火引起了全球的关注。除了巴西之外，印尼雨林也遭遇到大火肆虐，不止造成印尼国内严重的空气污染之外，雾霾也飘到了邻近的国家马来西亚跟新加坡的上空。